My family completely cut me off when I exposed my sister's infidelity to her fiancé and his family, but now they come crawling back asking for money because they need financial help. My family, my parents and my sister, yes, the same people who disowned me for exposing my sister's cheating scandal, have come to ask for my help. I'm still stunned by their audacity. These are the same people who abandoned me without a second thought, and now they're crawling back as if nothing ever happened. But I guess that's what happens when karma comes knocking on your door. But before diving into the current situation, let me give you some context. If you'd rather skip to the main event, feel free to scroll ahead. I'm a 34-year-old woman, and I grew up in the shadow of my older sister Jess, who is now 37. Jess was always the golden child, the apple of our parents' eyes, while I was treated like an afterthought. It often felt like my wants and needs didn't matter. Our parents poured all their resources into ensuring Jess succeeded, while I had to figure out everything on my own. Jess is undeniably attractive, but her personality, let's just say it's far from admirable. She mastered the art of using her charm to avoid consequences, and it was infuriating to witness. When we were kids, her antics were manageable, but once we hit our teenage years, her behavior took a sharp turn for the worse. She was manipulative, treated me poorly, and often embarrassed me in front of others, including family and friends. The most frustrating part was that no one ever called her out on her actions. She couldn't stand it if I got even a shred of attention. Somehow, she always managed to redirect the focus onto herself while making me look bad in the process. Being around her was draining. She spent 2 years after high school figuring out what to do until Dad managed to get her admitted into a design school without her lifting a finger. Meanwhile, I was told to work hard, earn scholarships, and take care of my own expenses. Our parents acted like Jess's personal bank, even going so far as to take out loans to pay for her education. Despite all that, she dropped out halfway through the program. Even after quitting school, she managed to land internships and jobs at respectable places. But those opportunities never lasted. She either got fired for being unreliable or left because she didn't like the work environment. Eventually, she convinced Dad to buy her a boutique because she didn't want to work for anyone else. With her incomplete education and minimal experience, Dad stepped in again, took out a loan, and set her up with a decent boutique. Meanwhile, I was working at cafes and tutoring to make ends meet. Dad always had money for her, but when I needed help, he was broke. I had to take out student loans, which took years to pay off. This double standard is what drove me away from my family. I moved out after high school and rarely visited. The family dynamic only got worse. During one of those rare visits 7 years ago, I went home for Christmas. It had been 2.5 years since my last visit, and my mom had begged me to come. Jess had moved out by then and was running her boutique. She was engaged to a guy, a good catch, or at least a much better person than my sister. He was a chemical engineer, handsome and well off. They'd been dating for a while and were planning a destination wedding in a few months. I talked to him and thought he seemed like a decent guy. I wondered what he saw in Jess, but kept my curiosity to myself. Jess also seemed to have changed. She was warm and kind to me, probably trying to show her fiancé how sweet she was. He was clearly smitten with her, but Jess wasn't as interested in him as she was in his money. One day, Jess invited me to her boutique for a tour. I said I'd drop by when I was free. The next day, I was walking near her shop and decided to check it out. When I arrived, the sign said closed. I thought it was odd since it was 11 a.m., well within business hours. I tried the door and found it unlocked. I thought she might be taking a break or something. I called her, but her phone was off. I hesitantly walked in, and what I saw made my stomach turn. She was kissing another man in a corner of her store. At first, I thought it was her fiancé, so I started to leave, apologizing. But then Jess saw me and pushed the guy away. That's when I realized it wasn't her fiancé. I walked out, and Jess followed me, asking me to stop. I didn't know how to react, so I just stopped. We stood in silence until she broke it, asking, "You're not going to tell anyone, right?" I looked at her in disbelief. Her excuse was even more disgusting. It didn't mean anything. He was just a cute customer who came in to buy lingerie for his girlfriend. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. The guy came to buy lingerie for his girlfriend and ended up making out with Jess? She kept apologizing and saying he was too cute to resist. I asked her, "Why are you apologizing to me? Does your fiancé know about your little make-out session?" I was sure this wasn't a one-time thing. It had to be a regular occurrence. Jess swore it was her first time cheating on her fiancé, but I didn't believe her. All her past relationships had ended because of her infidelity. She begged me to keep quiet and not tell anyone. I left, fuming. I felt terrible for her fiancé. Maybe I was projecting because I'd been cheated on a month before, but I empathized with him. I couldn't keep it in, and ended up telling my mom what I'd seen. To my surprise, she brushed it off and told me to keep quiet. Her reasoning? "Jess is getting married in a few months. You can't ruin it." Excuse me? I'm not ruining anything. Your daughter is in a dark corner of her store. I asked her if she had anything to say about Jess's behavior, but she dismissed it, saying, it's her life, her decision. We shouldn't interfere. Sure, it's her life, but she's cheating on her fiancé, and my mom was enabling her. She was more worried about losing a wealthy son-in-law and missing out on a luxurious wedding to show off. They wanted me to cover for Jess and let it go as a one-time mistake, but I knew it wasn't. I was furious, not just at Jess, but also at my parents for their attitude. They didn't even try to hold Jess accountable. Jess texted me asking, "We're good, right?" I replied, "No, we're not, unless you tell your fiancé the truth." She rushed over to my parents' house to talk to me. At first, she repeated the same excuses, saying it was a one-time mistake and that I should let it go. But when I didn't back down, she got aggressive. She asked, "What's your problem? Why do you care? Why are you meddling in my business?" I stood my ground and pressured her to confess to her fiancé. The situation turned into a fight between us. My parents sided with Jess to defend her and asked me to stay out of her business. The situation became so toxic and suffocating that I stormed out of the house. I wanted to leave immediately, but my flight was the next morning, so I wandered around the neighborhood. When I came back home in the afternoon, I saw Jess sitting there with her fiancé and his parents. I greeted everyone and was about to retreat to my room, but her fiancé asked me to join them. His parents were in town and decided to stop by. Jess and my parents became visibly uncomfortable. Jess quickly said, No, she has a flight to catch tomorrow. She needs to pack and all that. Her fiancé's parents were kind and asked me where I lived and about my work. Jess was anxious to get rid of me and used humor to diffuse her nerves. She said, "Oh, don't worry. You're the first people who've ever taken an interest in her life. She just has a regular job. Not everyone can run a business like me, right, honey?" Then she kissed her fiancé. I was about to ignore her, but her words made my blood boil. I responded, "Yes, that's true. Not everyone's lucky enough to have a boutique and sleep with their customers." I didn't actually see Jess sleeping with her customer, but in that moment, those were the words that came out of my mouth in anger. You can imagine the tension in the air. There was an awkward silence. Everyone looked at each other. My mom broke the silence by laughing. "You scared everyone with your dark humor, Jessie." My parents laughed, but the others remained confused. I looked at Jess's fiancé and said, "Yeah, my humor is very dark and very true." I headed to my room and her fiancé followed me into the hallway asking, "What do you mean by that?" Jess followed him saying, "She was just joking." He ignored her and asked me again if it was just a joke. I realized I'd caused trouble by speaking up. It was a difficult moment. One word from me, and their relationship was over. I stayed silent, unsure of what to say, but then I looked at their faces and said, "It wasn't a joke." Jess started yelling at me, "Why are you lying? Are you jealous because I'm marrying such a charming man while your boyfriend left you?" I was stunned by how bitter she was. I lost my temper and told her fiancé what I had seen that morning. He went ballistic. Jess denied it, saying I was framing her out of jealousy. My parents and his parents heard the commotion and rushed into the room. My mom joined Jess in cornering me and said, "Please ignore her words. She's going through a tough time. She was cheated on, and now she sees everyone as cheaters. You know Jess could never do something like that, right?" I was stunned by her words. My mom was painting me as crazy in front of everyone. Thankfully, Jess's fiancé wasn't a fool and asked Jess for her phone. She clung to it, but he forced her to hand it over. She tried to play the privacy card, but he stood firm and demanded to see her messages. His parents and my dad joined him in asking Jess to show her phone and settle the matter. But my mom sided with Jess, saying that asking for her phone was a violation of privacy and that he should trust Jess instead of me. It was a true horror show. My mom was already giving me murderous looks. Finally, he snatched the phone from her and forced her to unlock it. And there it was, flirty texts. Nudes. He threw the ring at her face, forcibly took the engagement ring off her finger, and stormed out with his parents. Smart move on his part not to let her keep the ring. It looked expensive. Jess was practically on her knees begging him not to call off the wedding. She ran after them outside, trying to stop them and pleading for them to listen. You can imagine the hell I went through after that. As soon as they left, my mom slapped me across the face. Before I could say anything, she screamed, "Get out! You're dead to us! Don't you dare show your face to us again! You're no longer our daughter." I looked at my dad, and he shook his head in disgust and walked away without saying a word. But I didn't cry. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'll never come back to this hell." I grabbed my things and left. Jess came at me furiously, but I shoved her aside and left. She was crying and cursing me for ruining her life. I spent the night at the airport. I blocked them all immediately and deleted their contacts. I haven't been in touch with any of them since. Yesterday, I received an unexpected visit from Jess and my mom. To cut this part short, since the post is getting long and I'm tired of writing, they were in a tough spot. Jess's life had fallen apart. Her boutique went bankrupt, and she's struggling to make ends meet. And of course, my parents were also in ruin and deeply in debt because my dad had been suffering from a terrible illness and couldn't do anything. So they came crawling back, asking for my help. I slammed the door in their faces and didn't let them in. I feel satisfied with my action, but a part of me worries about my dad. Do you think it's a good idea to help my dad, given that he's been struck by illness? Update 1. Thanks to everyone for your advice. Here are some updates. I was feeling uneasy and received mixed responses to my post, so I contacted my aunt, my dad's sister, who lives just a block away from my parents. I've kept moderate contact with her since I moved away. My aunt usually keeps me informed about the drama happening there. Some time ago, she told me that my dad felt guilty for how he treated me and wanted to make amends. But my mom, still loyal to Jess, dissuaded him from contacting me. I know my dad is a peacemaker and wouldn't want to disturb the peace at home by bringing me back into the picture. My aunt told me that after Jess's infidelity was exposed, my dad stopped paying the boutique's mortgage. By then, he had already paid more than half. He asked Jess to cover the remaining amount, but she failed, and the property was auctioned off. Obviously, she couldn't save it. Karma is a beautiful thing. After her breakup, Jess quickly found a new sponsor to fund her luxurious lifestyle. But surprise, surprise, her cheating caught up with her again, and he left her too. Meanwhile, my mom continued blindly supporting Jess, never holding her accountable for her mistakes, because she also benefited from what Jess received from her boyfriends and my dad. Now that he's sick and can't work to bring in money, they don't even care about him. It's like karma has come full circle. He never supported me or took my side, so I don't care about him at all now. He made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. A month later, I learned that my mom had left my dad in a terrible hospital. They had defaulted on insurance for a year, so the coverage had significantly decreased, and now they had to pay a large portion of the surgery themselves. Obviously, she couldn't afford it, or maybe she didn't want to spend the money. I felt bad. I just couldn't reconcile the idea of letting him die when I had the means to save him, so I went to see him. He broke down when he saw me. He cried, hugged me, and apologized. He told me my mom had never visited him after leaving him there. I took him out of that place, admitted him to proper medical care, and paid for his treatment. Somehow, my mom and Jess found out and came to the hospital, but my dad glared at her and told her he'd deal with her once he recovered. Jess kept her distance, but my mom tried to talk to me, thanking me for taking on the responsibility. I turned my back on her and pretended she didn't exist. My dad was discharged 3 weeks ago and is recovering well. I check in on him sometimes, but my tone remains cold. I told him that since he raised me, I owed him that much, but he shouldn't expect anything more from me, nor do I want to stay in touch. He respects my boundaries and said he'd like to work on our relationship, but obviously at my pace. I'm still deciding about that. That's all for now. I'll update if anything significant happens. Update 2. As my dad promised, the first thing he did after recovering was leave my mom. He sold the house without her knowledge since it was in his name, packed his things into an RV, and left quietly. My mom was visiting Jess at the time, who was in another city, and when she returned, he was already gone. She panicked and went to file a missing person report, but the officers investigated and concluded that my dad wasn't missing. He'd left of his own accord. So no report was filed. My mom was left at Jess's mercy, who was staying at her boyfriend's house. Naturally, she came looking for me. As soon as I opened the door, she started crying and apologizing. I had to let her in. I live in an apartment and couldn't let her make a scene in front of the neighbors. She told me the details, which I've already mentioned above. I said to her, "So what? Why me? What happened to your golden daughter? Why isn't she supporting you?" She started sobbing, saying that Jess is struggling to make ends meet. Her boutique closed, sales plummeted due to lack of supplies. She had no money for inventory, she couldn't pay the mortgage, and everything fell apart. She's barely staying afloat but finds it impossible to take care of me. "So, that's why you've come knocking on my door? The one you never supported but resented all your life?" She quickly defended herself. "Dear, it was your dad who financially preferred Jess over you, the design school and the boutique, and still you paid for his treatment. I've always treated you both equally. Why such bitter words toward me? If you're angry about that slap, I'm so sorry. You can't imagine the humiliation we faced after Jess's wedding was canceled. I didn't support Jess's infidelity. All I wanted was for you to stay quiet until the wedding. But anyway, that's in the past. Please forgive your mom." I told her she didn't need to justify why I paid for my dad's treatment, or why I couldn't help her. It's my money and my decision. I told her I didn't feel comfortable talking to her, so it was better if she left and didn't come back. She left after that, apologizing. Later, I learned that she's now working in a salon. Well, good for her, finally realizing the importance of getting back on her feet. A couple of days ago, I found out Jess had been kicked out by her boyfriend because she was caught cheating again. You know, Once a cheater, always a cheater. She went to her mom for help, but this time, her mom kicked her out. My mom is barely surviving in a friend's garage, which has been converted into a temporary room, so how could Jess expect help from her? Apparently, my mom lashed out at Jess, saying she was the reason my dad left and why I hated them. After that, Jess called me from a new number. She was crying and wanted me to step in, but I hung up before she could finish her sentence. I blocked her number. She then sent me a long email. She blamed my mom for enabling her toxic behavior. She wrote, "I wasn't born like this. Our parents made me this way. Why couldn't they teach me morals and values? They handed me everything on a silver platter, and now they've suddenly abandoned me to fend for myself. How unfair is that? They could have taught me self-sufficiency like they taught you. If you think you suffered because of their bias, you're wrong. I've suffered. Look at my life compared to yours. I'm still dependent on others, jumping from one shoulder to another, but look at you. Please help me rebuild my life. Please help me." Her email was moving, wasn't it? What do you think I did after reading it? That's right. I deleted it and blocked her. I know she's very good at manipulating. How else do you think she gets rich men to give her money? Sure, beauty is an enabler, but she's also good with words, and maybe with other things too. I don't care at all about her, my mother, or even my father. I paid for his surgery because I felt I owed him that for bringing me into the world and raising me, nothing more. I've suffered immense mental torture because of them, and it took me years to heal. There's no way I'm going to disturb my peace for them. Update 3. Well, get ready for another dose of karma at its finest. A few days ago, I got another call from an unknown number. At first, I wasn't going to answer, but something told me I should. I won't trust my instincts again. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother's broken voice. Without even saying hello, she started crying and telling me how she and Jess had ended up living in her friend's garage. Apparently, the situation has gotten so bad that they're now sleeping together on the cold, damp floor of the garage with just a mattress. My mom started complaining about the conditions they were living in, saying the garage is cold and uncomfortable. They're sharing a small space among rusty tools and dusty boxes. We have no privacy. We can't even take a decent shower. We're living like beggars, my mom sobbed. Of course, my response was, "And how is this my problem exactly?" My mom kept trying to guilt trip me. She said she couldn't bear to see Jess in that state, that she was her daughter, and she had failed to protect her. "Your sister is depressed. She has nowhere to go, and we have no one else to turn to," she said, trying to sound pitiful. I tried to keep my composure while listening. My mother, who had preferred Jess my entire life, was now coming to me, the daughter who was always pushed aside, to fix her life. She kept begging, saying all they were asking for was a safe place to stay, even if it was just temporary, until they could get back on their feet. I told her coldly, "It seems like now you're finally experiencing what it's like to depend on others and get absolutely nothing in return. Maybe this will teach you a lesson in humility." "No, Mom, I'm not going to help you. You deserve this." My mom went silent for a moment, then started begging again, saying she understood that she'd made mistakes, that Jess understood it too, and that they just needed a second chance. "Please, daughter, we were wrong, but we need help. I don't want your sister to stay in this horrible situation. As a mother, I'm asking for one last favor." I responded with the same coldness, "I'm glad you're finally understanding what it's like to suffer. Unfortunately, I'm not your savior. I don't care what happens to you. You lived at my expense for years, and now that you need something, I'm not available. You'll have to find another way to survive." Before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked the number. If I listened to her cries throughout the call, it was because I found it amusing. Yes, I'm petty, so what? After everything, I think I deserved this. I feel no remorse anymore. They chose their path, and now they're paying the price. Let them enjoy their life in the garage because they have no other choice. As for me, I'm finally at peace, knowing I did the right thing by cutting them out of my life. End of the story, at least for now. But if karma keeps doing its thing, I'll keep you updated. Update 4. First of all, thank you to everyone who commented and shared their own stories of favoritism. Reading your experiences made me realize something important. Many times when one child is treated differently, there's a deeper hidden reason behind it. It's a pattern that sadly repeats itself in many families. What struck me most was that several of you mentioned that in your cases, the favoritism stemmed from infidelity in the past. This made me think about my own situation, and I started questioning the real reason behind the resentment my father and mother always showed me. So, when my father was visiting the state recently, I decided to confront him. Although we had barely spoken since I helped him with his treatment, I felt I needed answers, even if those answers turned out to be painful. I contacted him and asked to meet. At first, the conversation was awkward after all. We hadn't had a close relationship in a long time, but I didn't want to keep carrying this uncertainty. Finally, After talking about trivial things for a while, I dropped the question that had been eating away at me. Why did you always treat me with so much resentment? Why did you always make me feel like a stranger in my own family? My father was silent for a long time. I could see the internal struggle on his face, and at that moment, I knew there was something bigger behind it all. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed deeply and confessed, "You're the product of an affair." Those words hit me like a bombshell. Everything inside me froze. I tried to process what I had just heard, but it was as if the world had stopped spinning. My father continued, his voice breaking, explaining that my mother had an affair during a time when their marriage was at its lowest point. When I was born, he always suspected I wasn't his biological daughter, and over time, he was able to confirm it. However, the resentment grew over the years, deeply affecting the way he treated me. He said he believed my mother resented me for the same reason, even though she never admitted it outright. I didn't know what to do with this information. My father apologized for all the pain he had caused me, for all the resentment and hurt he had put me through. He said he had been unfair and cruel, and now he realized how wrong his actions had been. He asked for my forgiveness, with tears in his eyes, begging me to forgive him for being such a distant and cold father. But I don't know if I can forgive him. Despite his confession and apologies, the damage is already done, and those scars run deep. I don't know what to do with all of this. My world has been shaken, and I don't know how to put the pieces back together. The only thing I know for sure is that I don't want to see my mother or my half-sister again. They've caused too much pain in my life, and I have no interest in reopening those wounds. I think this will be my final update. I have a lot to think about, and I'm not in a position to keep updating my story. Until now, it had been amusing to me, but now it's turned into a nightmare.